In December, members of the DNC's Rules and Bylaws Committee took several shots at the Granite State, implying New Hampshire is too white, too wealthy, and not sufficiently loyal to the Democratic Party to keep the first primary.
People who live on dirt roads, do you know what it's like to live on a dirt road? Do you know what it's like to try to find running water that is clean? Do you know what it's like to wait and see if the storm's gonna pass you by and your roof is still intact? That's what this is about.
And we need to give voice to the communities that have shown will support our candidates, will support our values as a party, and are the backbone of this country.
Our candidates, when we run them through this gauntlet, they have to show us first and foremost that they get our loyal base. But then they've got to show us that they can move to a Hispanic base, which is not quite as loyal, but still very big. We need to show that we can win those college-educated techies in New Hampshire.
The National Democratic Party has changed its approach this cycle, even though the party's leader, President Joe Biden, still has not announced if he's running for re-election. That's freezing the field for the most part, with no official word on when an announcement might come. We'll have to wait and see what happens, but no matter what, the president and New Hampshire have not always gotten along. If President Joe Biden and New Hampshire have a relationship status, it's safe to say it's complicated. Biden didn't campaign in the Granite State during the general election in 2020, sending the future First Lady and Second Gentleman to do a masked drive-by meet and greet. He still won the state by a solid margin. The last time New Hampshire saw Joe Biden in a campaign setting was in 2020, when he was preparing to abandon ship ahead of a disastrous primary finish.
Does it seem like you're giving up on New Hampshire?
I'm not giving up on New Hampshire. Don't poke that in my face, okay, buddy?
For many Democrats, Biden's recent move to try to end the traditional New Hampshire primary and relegate it to a second-tier status feels like a betrayal. And it cuts deeper for some because of the relationships the president built here over 4 decades of visiting the state. Former New Hampshire House Speaker Steve Shurtleff, a Biden supporter dating back to the 80s, says he can't just sit back and let Biden take away something New Hampshire created.
I'm sure he's thinking, some of those people, they're bluffing. They'll be there for me. I tell you right now, I won't. I'll look for another candidate before I'd support Joe Biden if he should go so far as to take away the first of the nation primary.
For Biden, it's possible coming up short here in 3 different presidential campaigns left a bit of a mark. There was his spectacular meltdown in 1987, insulting a Claremont schoolteacher who asked him about his qualifications for the presidency.
I think I probably have a much higher IQ than you do, I suspect. I went to law school on a full academic scholarship.
In 2007, his candidacy flamed out more quietly, without fanfare or much interest from voters.
This will all shake out.
The 2020 cycle saw Biden launch with a big splash, only to flounder in Iowa and New Hampshire, where voters got to see him up close and personal. While Biden was still able to connect with voters one-on-one, there were gaffes that raised eyebrows, like when he thought he was campaigning in Vermont when he was actually in Keene.
So what's your impression of Keene?
I'm back. I've been here a number of times. Last time was, I think, all the way back in 2014, but I've been here before that. I love this place. Look, what's not to like about Vermont in terms of the beauty of it?
As president, when Biden returned to New Hampshire, visiting Woodstock to herald the passage of the infrastructure bill, or the Seacoast to tout a new ship turning basin in the harbor, if anyone talked to him about the fate of the primary, it wasn't in public. Even if he runs for re-election as expected, it's possible we won't see Biden at all in this primary, nor will his name be on the primary ballot if he follows DNC rules. Granite Staters who pride themselves on knowing their presidents personally will have to write in Joe Biden.
Some Democratic candidates aren't waiting for an answer from President Biden. Marianne Williamson recently launched her second White House bid. And at least one other well-known Democrat says he could get into the race against Biden as well.
This country is drowning in information and starving for understanding. Hello, everybody.
Since officially announcing her run in late February, Marianne Williamson has already been campaigning in the Granite State, outlining a progressive platform, including universal health care, a guaranteed living wage, and free child care. The best-selling author says, much like faltering banks got government lifelines in recent weeks, others in this country should be getting a lot more federal help.
Why aren't we doing the same kind of rescue for people in America who are carrying medical debt? Why aren't we doing the same kind of rescue for people who are carrying these ridiculous college loans?
In this second White House bid, Williamson says she knows taking on the sitting president is no easy task, but believes it must be done. Another Democrat who just filed to run, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the environmental lawyer from one of the country's most famous political families, says he too would flank Biden from the left on progressive issues.
The rigging of the system, the war against America's middle class.
RFK Jr. has become a vocal defender of New Hampshire's first-in-the-nation primary, writing an open letter to the DNC denouncing its plan to change the voting calendar. At his recent talk on the campus of St. Anselm College, much of the speech focused on COVID-19 and the issue that puts him out of step with much of his own party, the vaccine resistance movement.
And all of these injuries that I speak about to children, there is no bigger issue for our country than that.
One veteran of New Hampshire primaries is ABC News political director Rick Klein. We sat down with him to ask what stands out to him in this primary cycle.
I'm struck by how late it's starting comparative to last cycle, when you had well more than a dozen Democrats lining up to try to defeat the incumbent president this time 4 years ago. Really, you only have two major candidates so far filing for president. And also the uncertainty on the Democratic side, where the possibility of the Democratic primary in New Hampshire not mattering at all for the sake of delegates opens up other possibilities about what could happen here. You have just more factors of uncertainty. You have uncertainty around the calendar. You have uncertainty over whether the Democrats will have a competitive one that matters at all. The possibility of independents voting in large numbers in the Republican primary. And then you have the unique factors around this moment in Republican politics. Donald Trump shocked the world by winning here in the last cycle. By some measures, he's a huge following. You'd imagine that he could do a lot there. Ron DeSantis has gotten enormous name recognition. You have the governor here, Governor Sununu, who's talked about running, and he would have an obvious home field advantage. Then you just layer on top of that others who are saying, looking down at the other states and saying, you know, if I'm not competitive in Iowa, South Carolina has one already. They may have two a native son and a native daughter running in South Carolina. Maybe I have to make a splash in New Hampshire. And this remains the single best opportunity to break through as a lower tier or not known commodity. The lure of the New Hampshire primary remains for anyone that wants to be able to shock the whole system. This is probably the best place to do it.
One way to look at the DNC decision is as the latest in a series of changes, ushering in a new 21st century style of campaigning. But the value of the first-in-the-nation primary may be more enduring than many people realize.
There's a lot of attention on the decision by the DNC, and that's a big deal, right? It's a formal attack on the New Hampshire's first-in-the-nation primary, and it has repercussions. But if you pay close attention to what's been happening over the last 12 years, 15 years, the primary has evolved in a way that has also eroded what we think of when we think of the presidential primary. We've seen during the Obama candidacy, these mega events, Oprah Winfrey going into the SNU Arena and taking it over, getting away from the more local retail politics piece of it. We saw national debates taking folks away from New Hampshire, the nationalization of the primary process, where we're talking about national issues, not so much about issues that are important to Granite Staters or local voters. So what we all remember fondly are the visits to the transfer stations, the house parties, seeing somebody at the Red Arrow Diner or some other local spot, the politics and eggs events. There's less of those things happening and more emphasis on big national events that are more choreographed, that attendees are invited to instead of being open to the public. There has been a slide, in a sense, of the primary in a direction that is really inconsistent with its origins that should have concerned us all along. The DNC's decision is a big event, but it's one of several challenges that the primary has been experiencing for a time. We will fight to the next primary. The problem with all of this is that once you open the door to change like this, your ability to manage it becomes limited. So the DNC has taken a step. Somewhere I'm sure there are Republicans also talking about, is New Hampshire the best place for us to start? Is a swing state the best place for us to start? And I fear that once that door has been opened, that we're going to be fighting, even more of a fight, uphill fight, going forward. But look, we're Granite Staters. Every cycle, there seems to be somebody that wants to replace us as a leadoff contest. We've gotten pretty good at maintaining ourselves. I think we keep doing what we do well. We emphasize the fact that our voters turn out, our voters pay attention, and that primaries are to Granite Staters very much part of who we are. We see it in our DNA. As long as we hold on to those things, I think we'll be okay.
What the primary may look like, whoever will be in the field, and however the political parties decide to handle 2024 will unfold over the next few months. But one thing will remain most important: the voters. How they see issues and candidates and the primary is still very much a work in progress. When it comes to politics,
no way. No, thank you.
Some Granite Staters say the landscape right now is just too divisive.
Presidency? Oh, God, no. Yeah. No, I'm trying to stay away from that.
I try not to think about politics. I'm pretty much disgusted with both parties.
Others are ready for the presidential primary showdown to begin.
I love it. Bring it on.
When it comes to the candidates, in true New Hampshire fashion, voters want to thoroughly vet them first.
I can't say at this point whom I might vote for, but I am following it.
Just trying to keep my options open.
But Granite Staters do have solid opinions on whether New Hampshire's primary should be first.
It's a great thing to have it here. It's a small state. People get pressed on the issues. Candidates get pressed in a way that it doesn't happen in other states.
I think it's a difficult situation with the state law being that we have to be first in the nation. I see the points, though, of why we shouldn't be, because we're a pretty non-diverse state.
It's a great place for people to vote. It is a diverse group. People think it's not. There's a lot. The schools in Manchester have 11 languages in one classroom, so it's really diverse.
Those we spoke with say some of the key issues they care about.
My wages aren't keeping up with inflation. You know, the grocery store prices go up every week.
I'm not happy about what's happening right now about Roe v. Wade and abortion rights.
I think every election is important. I think that this is definitely going to be one of the more polarizing ones.
One voter, at least, is not optimistic about any potential contenders.
No, I think they're wildly out of touch. I think that they kind of sit in their like crystal tower and they don't really care about what goes on with us.
On both sides of the aisle, many we spoke with say what they'd like to see most in 2024 and beyond.
I wish as a community, as a nation, we could be much more civil with each other.
I don't know, it might be cheesy, but I just kind of wish we could come together again.
We have much more ahead, including a look at the rest of the Republican field, the candidates who have already declared, and the ones to watch in the coming weeks.
Plus, as one party toys with tradition, how could that affect turnout? And what will that mean for campaigns counting on a strong performance in New Hampshire?